Why is Donald Trump always talking about J.K. Rowling? Is he basing his presidency on Voldemort's regime? That is the question we ask today, and it is the thread that ties together the year we have traced. For in the steps by which Voldemort captured the ministry and the methods now used to bend the Department of Justice, the resemblance is too sharp to dismiss. What follows is not a fanciful comparison but a mirror. Suspicion turned into decree, decree into purge, purge into resistance, resistance into conspiracy, and conspiracy punished as truth. It began with denial. When Voldemort first returned, the ministry under Cornelius Fudge refused to admit it, instead branding truth as hysteria and dragging Harry into a show trial before the Wizengamot to make him seem untrustworthy. The Daily Prophet became a weapon, portraying warnings as lies, so that reality itself could be declared suspect. The strategy was simple: control the story to control the state. In 2025, the Department of Justice became the equivalent stage. The presidency framed DOJ as a nest of deep state disloyalty and treated skepticism as sedition. February's order to terminate all remaining Biden-era United States attorneys, followed by cascading attrition in key divisions, made the narrative operational. Independence was cast as partisanship, judgment as betrayal. Memos and briefings pushed alignment and message discipline. The objective mirrored the ministry's: define reality from the top, and make anyone who contradicts it look suspect before a single case file is opened. When denial could no longer sustain itself, Voldemort's forces turned to legalistic capture. Dolores Umbridge arrived at Hogwarts with educational decrees, the Inquisitorial Squad, and inspections that punished competence and rewarded compliance. Authority reasserted through paperwork, plaques, and penalties. The presidency's equivalent came in the form of procedural suffocation dressed as guidance. DOJ leadership built an internal architecture to police loyalty, a weaponization working group to re-examine cases through a conformity lens, corporate enforcement and FCPA policies that resented discretion at main justice, seasoned attorneys shunted to sanctuary cities enforcement to sideline capacity without formal sackings. Everything wore the mask of guidance and standardization. As with Umbridge's decrees, the method was procedural suffocation, the motive to make fidelity to evidence subordinate to fidelity to power. Once the structure was captured, the need arose to discredit exemplars. At Hogwarts, the ministry staged justice as intimidation. Harry's disciplinary hearing was timed, staffed, and publicized to produce shame rather than truth. Trelawney was humiliated in the courtyard, Hagrid dragged away under cover of darkness, McGonagall felled by a barrage of stunning spells. Prestige offered no shield when performance was the point. In Washington, August brought American analogues. A Hatch Act probe into special counsel Jack Smith was publicly opened and deliberately kept on going. Search warrants were executed at John Bolton's home and office. Seizures made without charges. Affidavits were unsealed to dramatize secrets without adjudicating guilt. Process became punishment. The performance designed to chill the bar and teach the bureaucracy who could be touched. As at the ministry, the goal was not resolution, but example. Turn high-profile resistors into warnings pinned to the institution's notice board. But suppressing individuals was never enough. Voldemort's ministry understood that truth itself had to be strangled, so it seized the press and banned the forums of speech. The Daily Prophet was bent to partisan service, the Quibbler outlawed, student organizations prescribed. Later, the Muggle-born Commission criminalized identity itself. The aim was always the same: silence the chorus so that the official line was the only song left. In September 2025, justice moved down the same path. After the assassination of activist Charlie Kirk, Attorney General Bondi floated hate speech prosecutions against those who trivialized the killing, narrowing later but leaving the warning intact. The president signed an order branding Antifa a domestic terrorist organization, and just days later labeled non-profits and donors as agitators ripe for investigation. Networks were pressured not to carry Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show for political satire criticizing the president and his followers, and it was suspended. The method was unmistakable: make speech costly, satire risky, association suspect. The motive was identical to the ministry's: strip dissent of its megaphone so the official narrative could be the only sound in the room. The facade of normalcy remained, but the guardrails were drained. Voldemort left the marble of the ministry intact while hollowing its guardians. Competent auras reassigned, professors neutralized, the Wizengamot cowed. Later, a puppet minister was installed to preserve appearances while Death Eaters set policy. In 2025, DOJ suffered the same hollowing. Its federal programs branch lost nearly 2/3 of its lawyers. The Civil Rights Division shed 70% through exits and reassignments. Senior prosecutors resigned rather than front for politics. And inspectors general were purged. Months later, a court declared those purges unlawful but left them unrepaired. The seals, lecterns, and press conferences stood, but the memory and capacity inside was gone. Attrition was the method, the motive to strip away anyone who might say no while insisting the institution had never changed. And so, resistance was forced underground. At Hogwarts, outlawing the teaching of defense generated Dumbledore's army, a secret society meeting in the Room of Requirement, keeping alive the memory of true practice. The ministry called it conspiracy, but it was repression that made it real. In Washington, the pattern echoed. Resignations and protests began as daylight acts of conscience. When those were punished, they turned into encrypted threads, Senate drop boxes, law school seminars on lawful refusal. As judicial opinions were disregarded, whistleblower packets multiplied, and people began to wonder if there was any line the Department of Justice could not cross. To power, these channels were evidence of a hidden network. In truth, they were the inevitable byproduct of criminalizing integrity. The method was compulsion, the motive, paradoxically, was fear, and it conjured the army from projection into practice. By summer, the need for enemies grew insatiable. Voldemort's ministry imposed dragnet laws, the Muggle-born Registration Commission, snatchers roving for undesirables, charges stretched to fit whoever needed silencing. The point was not justice, but supply. The narrative required fresh enemies. The same logic prevailed in 2025. Rare mortgage misstatement cases were suddenly prosecuted against Letitia James, Lisa Cook, and Adam Schiff. Investigations were floated against Brennan and Bolton. A US attorney who refused pressure to charge was dismissed and replaced. Reuters pointed out the rarity of such cases, but that was not the flaw, it was the feature. Selectivity itself was the evidence, each atypical case validating the premise that a coordinated threat existed. Expansion was the method, feeding the narrative was the motive. Finally, the prophecy fulfilled. Having smeared, decreed, purged, silenced, and expanded, Voldemort's ministry turned to the final step: naming a commander to prove the conspiracy real. Dumbledore was accused, framed as the general of rebellion, his army declared criminal. The indictment made paranoia tangible and the war open, so too in Washington. On September 25th, James Comey was indicted. Hours later, the president declared there will be others. In the same week, oversight was declared unlawfully purged but left broken. Non-profits were branded agitators. Dissent was chilled. Rivals investigated. The imagined Comey's army transformed from rumor to governing premise, providing the uniting principle for its own paranoia. By criminalizing principled, visible dissent, the presidency forced resistance into darker channels, shadier, angrier, less accountable, the very form of opposition it most feared. Every lever of control, prosecution, speech policing, media pressure, institutional hollowing, made resistance more dangerous, turning auditors into insurgents. That is how paranoia makes its prophecy, and then mistakes the echo for the enemy. This is the anatomy of the loop. It begins with suspicion, grows into decree, hardens into purge, drives resistance into being, and then punishes resistance as conspiracy. Voldemort conjured Dumbledore's army by creating a threat and removing the means of defense. Trump has conjured his resistance in the same way. Both reveal the paradox of authoritarian power. In seeking to eradicate opposition, it makes opposition inevitable. Comey's army began as illusion became symbol and ended as reality. Not because it was plotted in secret, but because paranoia, once acted upon, cannot help but make its prophecy come true.